Donnie Brasco. This is a first time watch for me. I hadn't seen this film all the way back when it came out. It was one of those that was on my radar for like years and years, and it's just, for some reason, I've just always stayed away from it. I've just never never got around to it. But yeah, having to force myself to do it because we've got the 31 on 31 coming up in May, where we're doing gangster movies, and this is on there. So yeah, it's directed by Mike Newell, and it stars Al Pacino and Johnny Depp, and it follows Johnny Depp's character, who's this FBI agent undercover trying to work his way into the mob, and he befriends this character, kind of a mid-level. It seems like a top-level guy at first, but the more the film goes on, you realise actually no, he's more like mid-level guy, played by Al Pacino. And it's about that. It's based on a true story. And obviously, you know, we've seen these kind of movies before where people go undercover, and you always think, oh, just how far undercover are they going to go? Is the FBI agent going to become so entrenched in it? You know, I think of films like Prince of the City, where they become so entrenched in what they're doing that by the time you get to the end of it, you can't distinguish the good guys from the bad guys, and that's kind of a little bit like what this film is about. It deals with that, looks at that a little bit. You know, how far do you have to go in order to bring down the criminals, and in so doing, do you cross a line that you can't step back over from? Beyond that as well, it is kind of like this weird little love story between these two characters, Johnny Depp's character and Al Pacino's character. So Depp plays Donnie Brasco. That's his undercover name at any rate. This is the character he's pretending to be, Donnie Brasco. And you got Al Pacino playing this gangster called Lefty. And when we first meet the two men, Lefty comes across as, you know, quite high level. He's giving all these big speeches about how, you know, any man in this town would know my name and, you know, would show me respect and all that. And he's talking with bravado. And you realise over the course of the film that it is just bravado. This guy is actually quite pathetic. And one thing this film kind of deals with as well is just how pathetic most of these guys are. They're all ladder climbers. They all want to get to the top spot. But then when they get up to the top spot, it doesn't really mean anything. It's completely of little value, because a lot of these guys, when they do come to the end of it all, end up getting taken out by supposedly their best friend.
In our thing, you get sent for, you go in alive, you come out dead, and it's your best friend that does it.
I don't know about their idea of friendship compared to mine, but it somewhat differs. For me personally, I was looking at it and I was thinking, you know what, these guys are really pathetic. So many of them, even the ones that are like a top dog and seem to carry all the power, seem to carry all the respect. It's not a respect out of love, it's a respect out of fear. And I can't imagine living in that life, you know, like, I know Goodfellas, and I'm going to get around to watching Goodfellas as well fairly shortly, I think. It's been a long time since I've seen Goodfellas. But one of the things about even Goodfellas was that it never attracted me to that life. You know, like we open up with Ray Liotta's character saying, ever since I remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. And then I expect the film to show me why, and it never truly does. And this film is very similar in the sense that there's nothing about this lifestyle that is put on display in this film that would make me want to be part of it. You know, that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that as a criticism of the film so much as that's one of the things that the film kind of explores in a way. I come away from it thinking, thank God I'm so far removed from that lifestyle. But then you have the notion of, I say, you know, this cop, this FBI agent who willingly goes into that in order to bring them down, and in so doing kind of ends up stepping over a few lines. Now, whether or not there's any room for a redemptive comeback for him, back to civilian life, back to, you know, is something that I'll leave you to decide for yourself when you watch it. Is that even possible? So this guy has a wife and 3 children, and obviously one of the big aspects of the film is the fact that every ounce that he's putting into this mob life, this undercover work, is just more time that he's being dragged away from his kids, away from his wife. That has an effect on his family. I just kept thinking throughout it that, this is not the kind of person who should be chosen. You know, I think if you're doing undercover work, or if you're getting chosen for undercover work, if you got a wife and you got kids, that should be it. Automatically off the books, you don't get to do it. I think loners should have to do this kind of work, because it tears a family apart, and you know the damage that it does to the kids of a guy like this. But then obviously he has a particular drive that other people just don't have. So maybe the responsibility, the onus there is on him to not have had a family in the first place if he's going to go down the route of doing this work. It raises those questions about who do you have to be and what kind of sacrifices should you make in your life if you're going to go into this line of work. It's quite interesting to me. The film is filled with really great performances. Obviously Johnny Depp in the central performance. We see a lot of performances from Johnny Depp that are, you know, often in like Tim Burton movies. They're very kooky, very wacky and that kind of thing. And it's very easy to forget sometimes just how good of an actor he is when he's put in, you know, a straight role, a serious role, something he can really sink his teeth into that doesn't just require him to be wacky. And this is one of them. This is a really great role for him. Now, I saw some behind the scenes stuff where they spoke with the guy that it's based on. They had to blur out his face because the guy's actually in protective custody. I don't know if he's still alive today. Obviously, this film was made back in the 90s, but certainly at the time that this film was made, you know, the real life case took place in the 70s, and then even in the 90s, this guy was in protective custody because of the events that transpire in this film. Obviously, you know, some of the chunk that he took out the mob, they put a price on his head, so they had to blur his face out. But he talked about how he was kind of, yeah, he was really freaked out by how Johnny Depp met with him a few times and picked up his mannerisms and stuff. And even in that little bit that I saw with him, even though his face was blurred out, I could tell by the way that he speaks that Depp had picked up the accent. So it is a great performance from Depp, and I think he does a fantastic job as well of showing, just with facial expressions, the moral dilemmas that this guy has at any given moment. You know, if you prevent these guys from attacking this person, it will give me away. If I take my shoes off in this restaurant, it will give me away because I've got a wiretap in my boots. You know, things like that force him to make moral decisions that, again, blur those lines. Depp plays that really well. A standout for me was Anne Heche as well. She plays the wife of Depp. She's got a bit of a thankless task because she plays that typical, you know, the wife who's waiting back home for him. But you see the strain this puts on her, that puts on a family. You see the fact that she's having to hold the ship together without the aid of a husband who should be there to help look after the kids. All that is done really well, and the intelligence of the kids as well is represented pretty nicely in the film. You know, having kids myself, there are times when kids come out with something that kind of knock your socks off, where you're like, yeah, I forget sometimes just how intelligent a 5-year-old can be or a 7-year-old can be, and there's moments in this film where they show you that, you know, kids aren't stupid. They pick up on things, and they need a father. They need a mother. They need both at home. That is the ideal. And I think this film, again, along with many things, shows that.
How many times I have you into my own house? If you're a rat, then I'm the biggest mutt in the history of the mafia.
I really like what Al Pacino brings to this as well. Now, this is in his 90s period. This is when he was getting really gravelly voiced and whatnot. And a lot of people kind of say that he kind of brought in a lot of performances that were very similar, very samey, and I think that's quite unfair. I think in this film, he does an awesome job of showing us this kind of vulnerability to this guy that, you know, has spent his whole life trying to climb the ladder, trying to be noticed, expecting to be the next one to be put into the higher position, and always being passed over. And that realization over the course of the movie that he's never going to be top dog. He was never intended to be top dog. He's always a grunt. He will always be a grunt. And just having to accept that, having to face that, I think that's a relatable realization that a lot of people come to. You don't have to be a mobster to get to a certain point in life where, you know, a career, any kind of career where you realize, actually, I'm never going to be at the top. I'm always going to be middle management. And, you know, I think a lot of people can relate to that. So irrespective of whether, you know, this guy's killed people or whatever, you can understand that particular character dynamic, and I think Pacino plays it really well. He still has a sense of dignity about him, you know, he still holds his head up high, or tries to at any rate. Again, you know, there's moments where, despite that vulnerability, despite that pathetic kind of way about him, which, as I've already said, I feel like a lot of these guys have, once you look at what their lives amount to, they're actually all pretty pathetic. But despite that, there are moments where he reminds you that, okay, no, this guy's, he's done stuff, and he you know, he's not afraid to get his hands dirty. And it's, again, you know, you can see the relationship between him and Depp's character and how they become friends, and it's almost like this love story between two brothers, or like a father-son dynamic kind of deal. But that can lull you into this false sense of security about who these people really are and what they're capable of. And again, as I say, amongst all the other stuff that's explored in the film, that is something else that is explored. So there's a lot going on in the film. It's a really great look at mobster life that doesn't treat it with the kind of respect that I've seen some films pay it, where almost the mob life is glorified. I think a lot of the elements that are usually used to glorify mob life are present here, except they're used in this film to do the opposite. It's got a great script, some really great dialogue. It's from the same writer of Quiz Show, which is another film from the 90s that I just thought was brilliantly written. You know, in amongst all the mob stuff and some of the harder stuff and the family drama stuff, there are other little moments where we get to have just people having downtime. There's a nice little scene where you got Johnny Depp's character, and then there's these two other guys played by Tim Blake Nelson and Paul Giamatti, you know, early role for Paul Giamatti, where they just randomly show up, and yeah, they're these FBI agents who are doing like listening in on the undercover stuff, and just the conversation, the way that plays out, just the way they're talking about certain terms, phrases that mobsters use, and how he's had to pick them up in order to ingratiate himself into them and know what they mean just by the intonation and things. It's just a nice little conversation that, yeah, kind of brings a bit of levity to the situation, but also keys you into just, you know, some of the aspects that undercover work involves. So yeah, I like those kind of little details. There are a couple of instances where some of the dialogue feels like it's going for a Tarantino kind of, you know, we'd had Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs by that point, and then in the 90s we started seeing these scenes kind of come into films where people would just talk about some random pop culture stuff, and we do open the film with a discussion that goes on between these two characters about which car is better, a Cadillac or a whatever the other car was, I can't remember. But that felt very much to me like the writer trying to be a bit Tarantino. Thankfully, that was few and far between in the film. You know, there was plenty of films in the 90s that would egg that up to the nth degree, where you just knew that, okay, whoever's writing this wants to be the next Tarantino, and it just kind of rubs you the wrong way. Here, it doesn't plague the film or anything, but there are little moments where you do notice that influence. I liked Donnie Brasco, really enjoyed it. I'm reluctant to say that it was like 5-star or anything, because I don't like doing that on first watch, but I am torn between whether or not to give it 4 or 4.5. But just in terms of drama, the pacing of it, the performances, the themes that it deals with and the way in which it deals with them are all top notch. You know, it's beautifully shot, it's beautifully acted, it's a very well made film, and I'm kind of gutted it took me so long to get around to it. Really great film, loved it, fantastic. Yeah, top tier mob movie. But what about you? Have you seen Donnie Brasco? And if so, what did you think about it? Let me know your thoughts on the film down in the comment section below. Thank you for watching this review, and until next time, cracking.